This is OTR FM, part of the IOM Radio Network.
Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only No BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome.
There
was a time when words like spirituality and business were rarely paired together. But as we'll discover from the 10 best spiritual books chosen by this week's guest and the title of her own book, today's top marketers truly understand the need for and the wisdom of putting the soul back into selling. Dr. Natalie Petouhoff is an innovator, thought-provoker, inventor, change agent, and I love this title, empathy ambassador, who's worked and consulted with some of the biggest names in the corporate arena, including General Motors, Pepsi, Verizon, Best Buy, Procter & Gamble, and many more. As a senior customer experience strategist and business consultant, her focus in all her endeavors is the interplay between the evolution of technology and who we are as humans. She's the co-author of the new Wall Street Journal business best-selling book, Empathy in Action, How to Deliver Great Customer Experiences at Scale. And she joins us now to share the 10 best spiritual books that influenced her the most on her life journey. Dr. Natalie Petouhoff, welcome.
Thank you.
So tell us, how easy or how challenging was it for you to have to pick 10 books as the most influential?
This is one of the most difficult requests I've ever had, because since the time I was a little girl, I loved books. And I can remember going to the library and walking in and just smelling the smell of paper, right? And going to, like, I had some favorite bookstores, and I could just go in a bookstore and just get lost. And I wanted to read every single book possible. And I would check out books in elementary school, and I'd get 10 books, and the librarian would say, well, isn't that a lot of books? I'm like, no, not really. And I'd be back like in 2 days to get a whole new onslaught. So for me to be able to pick just 10, it's like so many amazing books. And what I love about books is you really get to see into the eye and heart of the author and their passion, and to share in that wisdom. And so many books have helped me think different or see something that I thought I knew. And then when I see them share their perspective and sit in their shoes and see it from their eyes, it's like, oh, huh. So yeah, this was, it was a difficult task.
So did you compile your list in chronological order, or is it just random?
Random. Yeah, it was hard because I was like, I looked at my bookshelf first, because I have lots of bookshelves, but I have like a bookshelf of a go-to books, and they're a combination, I would say, of spiritual books, what would be classified traditionally by a bookstore or bookseller as business books and spiritual books. So it's kind of a combination. And for me, the heart and soul should have always been part of business.
Yes.
Right? That it's separate. We're human beings, and we build products and services for other human beings. So for me to not have that emotional connection as part of work never made any sense. And so, yes, I'm the person that when I end my email, I have a happy face or a heart or a thank you. I'm just that person.
It's common sense, really, isn't it? I mean, we're all human beings. We all have the same likes, dislikes, desires, ambitions, etc. And the things that touch us, family, love, caring for one another. So it's a shame that for so long business has, and we see this with technology, especially, where you make a phone call and you're on, somebody at the other end has recorded a message saying, we really value your business, stay on the line, but they never tell you how long you're going to stay on the line. And
We
you think,
value
well,
it
you
so
don't.
so much that we're going to play music
Yeah.
for you. That's
Yeah.
irritating. And I mean, and what I do in my professional life is to try to fix those experiences, right? And that's what my book is about. But yeah, it's been interesting because what I see is business going through this paradigm shift where, in the first industrial revolution, it was really all about efficiency and effectiveness and the almighty dollar and profit over people, and often profit at the expense of the human condition. And so you take that zeitgeist of how the industrial revolution and factories and businesses started, and what I see is that there's still a historical footprint or DNA that's still there, and it's wanting and needing to change. And there are a few good things that came out of COVID. One of which I think is it created a cause for pause, which it put all of us on this moment of slowing down our lives and giving us time to reflect and to think about, is this really what I want for myself? Is this the way that I want to live my life? And so you see movements like the Great Reflection, and people leaving their jobs. Some retired, some got new training, some just left and went in a completely different direction. And you see businesses which tried to react to staying in business during a difficult time, laying off a lot of people. Airline industry, getting rid of pilots, laying off ground crew. And now, you try to make a reservation, there's not enough planes. And it's when I talk to my friends who are in the aviation industry, they're like, we don't have enough pilots. There's not enough, all those stories about the baggage getting lost. It's not that they don't know how to do baggage. It's that there's not enough ground crew.
Yeah.
So you look at this aspect of people, employees, right? And if you don't have employees, then you don't have people to do products and services. So that in and of itself should say, maybe we should treat these people better. And whether people stay or go is based on their experience of that company. And so we are in that experience economy. And then you have customers who are going through the same thing where they're tired of being treated poorly. They're tired of being on hold for 30 minutes. There's honestly no reason for that other than a company doesn't really know anything different and they have a blind spot. But there's no reason for that at all. Technologically, we have the ability to do that differently. It's just a matter of whether you see that 1-800 number as a cost center or whether you see that 1-800 number as a loyalty creation center.
Yes, exactly.
And most business people are like, no, I got to save costs. I'm like, well, what if I could tell you how to save costs and generate more revenue by treating people better?
Yeah.
They're like, you can do that? And I'm like, yeah.
That's your customer.
Yes.
And your customer has a choice. And your
They
customer
do.
could become your best salesperson if you treat them right.
Exactly. That's so true. I love that.
Yeah. So the first book you chose, which is a great favorite in this book club, it comes up again and again and again. It's so grounded, so down to earth, and it's absolutely perfect for everything that we've been talking about because it is The 4 Agreements, A Practical Guide to Personal Freedom by Don Miguel Ruiz, published in 1997. And those 4 words, or those 4 agreements, they apply across the board. So tell us when you came across this book and what it did for you.
So I came across this book when I was in the process of making a decision about my personal life. And I felt like I didn't know quite what was wrong, right, with a relationship. And I also was crossing a chasm in my work situation. And I couldn't quite put my finger on what wasn't working. And then when I read the 4 agreements, I was like, oh, we are our word. We are our agreements. And I had to look and self-reflect on what agreements I made consciously or unconsciously What were those agreements? And then what did I skip over in the agreement? And I found that I do a lot of bargaining, right? I'll say, well, I don't really like this about that, but I'm going to get this. So I kind of bargain, right? And so the conditions that I was facing are self-inflicted, right? As like we choose, or we choose something differently. And so what was interesting to me was to look at my own personal self-limiting beliefs and choices and agreements that I was making that were then causing me down the road cognitive dissonance. And once I got clear on what I thought maybe my agreements were, but didn't speak them out loud. So the idea of the unspoken and the spoken, and what are those agreements, and how clear was I? And I looked at why did I make those agreements? And part of it was fear. Part of it was not really feeling like I had a voice and that I could actually say how I felt and feel safe.
This book should be given, I think, to everybody. Everybody. It's like a handbook for life, isn't it? Certainly in business, it's a handbook for how to do good business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think if we were loyal to each other and really had each other's best interest at hand, and if we kept our agreements, I think oftentimes there's so many politics and there's so much self-promotion and self-preservation and uh, just selfishness. I've experienced this many times where I've done what I thought was the right thing for the company, and someone took advantage of that and used it to their own success. And I think if we let our companies using the four agreements, and that is like every time we make a decision or every time we start to think about choices that we make, are we really living by those principles? And then I think it would remind us to stay on course.
Yeah, absolutely. Book number 2 is a book that, according to Olympic champion Carl Lewis, should be required reading for every high school student in America and every parent as well. And the book is Season of Life, A Football Star, a Boy, A Journey to Manhood by Jeffrey Marks, published in 2004. Tell us about this book.
It was fascinating because I think I had a misconception about sports and about leadership in sports. And so you look at the transformation of someone who was a young football star and the influence that being on that team had. And I think that he recognized a lot of positive attributes of, as a young boy having a lot of energy, and sports gave him structure and gave him a container to take all that energy and to do something positive with it. But a lot of times in life, we're always worried about winning and losing. And what I thought was really fascinating was the way that the main character defined winning later in life was to love one another. And so really coming from that place of having each other's backs. And, to me, a sports team is like a team in business.
Yes.
So, teams are teams, and the team has a goal to accomplish. And there's a way to accomplish that goal, which keeps everyone's emotional well-being intact. And actually, when you do that, then you really get the best of everyone in terms of their abilities, in terms of their motivation, in terms of their innovation. They feel seen and heard and acknowledged. And so for me, I really felt like it was just a really great way to help young people understand what leadership is and give them some guide rails about how to grow up, right? Because being a teenager is a confusing time for sure. And I think that this book is a glowing example of what it means to be a leader.
How did that book come to you?
So I was doing a podcast, with my friend, and we were talking about, my book, and then he said, I said, well, what book have you read lately that was really influential? And he said, I highly recommend this one. He said, you will not get through it without tears. So I'm like, okay, that sounds like there must be something very touching in there. So,
Mm,
yeah, I think the interesting thing about books is a lot of time the recommendations come by word of mouth,
yeah.
and and some of the most highly recommended books, friends have said, you really, knowing my love for books, said you really need to look at this.
Mm, yeah. So, book number 3, a national acclaimed best-selling book that predicted the future, and it's called The Cluetrain Manifesto by Rick Levine, Christopher Locke, Doc Searles, and David Weinberger, and this was published in 2000.
So these guys were really ahead of their time. And so what they said was they were really looking at the voice of the customer and the voice of the employee. And they wrote it in a time where I think a lot of people were confused about work and confused about um, what it meant to be an employee. And there was a lot of command and control, years and years of command and control, and the employee not feeling like they had a voice. And so what they basically wrote about was a time and a place before the internet really took off. They predicted that there would be a place where people could actually have real conversations, authentic, not controlled by the powers that be or not controlled by fear, where people would actually say the truth. And so, what I think was really fascinating for me is to look at that book, and then having been in 2006, 8, 10, really becoming part of the social media infrastructure, having conversations that were meaningful. I mean, in the beginning, people were like, oh, well, Twitter's just people talking about taking their cat for a walk or they ate an apple, right? But then you start to really look at some of the really authentic and important conversations that have happened as a means of being able to say, really have freedom of speech.
Mm,
So for me, the Cluetrain Manifesto guys, they wrote it in a time, and when you read it, it's as though they were talking about a time and a place that they were projecting into the future, but it felt like, now looking back, that they saw it. So for me, it was fascinating for someone to, and four different people, right, giving their perspective, but all rounding it out to predict this future state. And they basically said, there will be technology that will allow us to do this, but we need to be really mindful of the technology we create and how we use it. And we can
mm.
see now that there's lots of great technology, and how it's used or misused affects all of our lives.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's put the customer, in a different place. Now, anybody, most companies have a Facebook page, and if they don't respond to the customer, well, straight away there's a black mark there.
Right. You
Everything
must
is so much more transparent.
Right. You must not care about me. Or if
Yeah.
you look at Amazon, right, for instance, any e-commerce site where people post, this product broke or the handle fell off, or, it doesn't fit properly. And if you're not on that page and responding and replacing things or helping people read that and go, okay, I am choosing between this one and that one. They don't respond on the page. This one does. This one might be a little bit more expensive, but I'm not going to have to return it. It's not going to break.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
it's that unspoken, right, conversation that's happening online that these guys predicted in the Cluetrain Manifesto. Customers are voting with their feet or their mouse.
Yeah.
And companies don't even realize that a potential customer is reading what's been written by the voice of the customer, right? And I'm not
Mm.
saying that companies don't have people that write reviews and make their product seem more positive. That does happen. But you can start to really look at some of the reviews and see authentically, in an authentic voice. When you read them, you can kind of tell, oh yeah, that sounds like it was a bot or just placed, versus the people who you can tell they actually used the product. They took pictures of it and they said, this was absolutely fantastic. I'd buy it again. I just bought some for gifts. Or they say things like, not so much. And so
Yeah.
if you're a company, so I wrote one of the first social media ROI models. And when I was trying to talk to companies about, does social matter? They were like, well, we don't really see it. And I'm like, okay, market research, right? And the ability to know that voice of the customer, to know your product's breaking, right? And that's why people are stopping. That's why your sales went down. So maybe you had a bad supplier of handles, or maybe the fastener doesn't work, or maybe it's a bad design. And I had a really interesting uh, customer that I worked with, and they were looking to expand their business, but they hired these fancy consultants. And I said, well, just look in your online community. They go, what do you mean? And I said, well, here's a guy who was a diaper bag company, right? And he said, love the diaper bags. However, all the flowers just don't work for me. Would be really great if you had something more guy like, whatever that means. So they came out with kind of a leather looking one and a blue jean one. All of a sudden, a brand new market, right? A brand new persona. And they launched a whole different new line, and highly successful, because guess what? People weren't making diaper bags for men, because it doesn't seem like that's your target audience.
Yeah.
So what the guys did in the Cluetrain Manifesto is really predict the future voice online of the customer and the employee.
What were their backgrounds? Were they IT guys?
Some were PR, some
PR?
were IT. So it was I think, and they think that's part of why they picked the group of they picked each other to write a book, because you have, the perspective of someone in technology who might see this, but then you also see someone who's talking about the brand and the brand value, right? And I can remember in 2008 I worked for a company that said, well, you can't get in trouble by posting something in Twitter. Like, they wanted to control our blogs, right?
Excuse
Like, you
me.
can't have I worked for
Yeah.
a tech company, and they were like, well, you can't have a tech blog, but you can write about wine or knitting or some hobby. And I said, well, what about social media? And they said, oh yeah, if you want to post on Twitter, we don't really care what you post there, because you know it doesn't really matter. And I'm like, okay, there's a conversation, right? And that's these guys were really talking about a conversation. And conversations, traditionally happen between people, but they were talking about a whole new network of people being able to have conversations with each other real time in a way that we had never imagined before. And that was the part that most businesses missed, is that, and people oftentimes, they'll see me post on social and they're like, you get like people going and people respond to you, and like, how do you do that? And I think, well, it's easy. I'm having a conversation.
That's it.
I'm writing it.
Communication.
It's communication.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is, it doesn't matter whether it's business or any area of life, communication is key. Yeah. Are you finding that, technology, social media, etc., is putting people, especially businesses, they really have to up their game, and they really have to be more authentic?
They do. They do. I think just touting the corporate line, in some PR slogan, because now we can pierce that veil, right? So before, when media was pushed at you on television, they could create a brand strategy and a slogan and a jingle, and you just kind of bought whatever. And there's a saying about, in those instances, you are the product, right? Because you're the one being sold.
Yeah.
And I think that when you have a conversation and people can talk back, so media from television and advertising and broadcasting was broadcast out with nothing coming back. And so that was the paradigm. And I think a lot of people's thinking when social came along was they didn't realize, oh, people are going to talk back to us, right?
Mm.
And they're going to say authentically how they feel, and you can't control it. Because I can remember, posts on certain companies' websites, and they would come to me and go, take this down. And I'm like, it's a public site, you can't take it down. And even if it wasn't public and you took it down and people noticed that you took it down, I mean, Dell went through that where they had this online community, and I think their laptops were catching on fire or something. And so they just took down the negative posts, and then people posted about them taking down the negative posts, which then created a whole other big issue for them, because they not only were they trying to cover up that the laptops were catching on fire and doing the right thing by the customer and recalling them, right? So they were trying to pretend like the problem didn't happen. They were trying to remove the evidence that it was happening. And so what companies learned was saying, oh my gosh, our laptops are catching on fire. Please know this. We're recalling them. Reach out to us. We want to help you. And that's a much more authentic and real way. It costs, and I think that those decisions to do that or not do that, people are like, what's going to cost us money? And there could be liability and lawsuits. But what you find is when companies actually are authentic and reach out like that, it goes a long way to loyalty, because you as a person know that company has your back. And so again, when you go back to buying, I'm going to buy from a company that pretends like a problem didn't happen, a problem as severe as things catching on fire, or someone says, wow, we had a product glitch, we're really sorry, we want to handle it. Who are you going to buy from?
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting how, I know many people, and I've had this experience myself, where you have a problem getting through to someone because you've got an issue and nobody is returning your calls. Nobody seems interested. But the minute you post a complaint, within 5 minutes, somebody's calling you and they're ready to fix it. That power has completely shifted.
Right. And it's sad that it took having this real-time feedback mechanism. And I would say it's an embarrassment network, right? So it's funny that you can call in and say, I'm really unhappy. And they go, yeah, well, there's not so much we can do about it, because it's between you and that person that they've hired to be the interface, right? And they're paid to get rid of you instead of help you. You post in social, it now becomes public. It's the canary in the coal mine. What you say and do is seen by millions and will last, just like a cave painting, for millions of years. And if you do this repeatedly, you'll gain a negative brand reputation. So companies are finally starting to realize, oh, when someone posts something negative, I need to pay attention to that. Now, I wish that it didn't take us as customers posting something negative to get them to pay attention. I think it's a start. At least they're doing something. But wouldn't it be nice if they actually authentically cared without being embarrassed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the public they're demanding this now. And I know for a fact that people these days would be prepared to pay more if they felt they were getting the service and being treated like a human being rather than just, a number.
Right.
So yes, I mean, and this is true of every area of life. We're in a time and era now where you can't hide anything anymore.
Mm-mm.
No, you just can't get away with it anymore.
Mm-mm.
So, we all have to up our game. But let's go on to book number 4, which is Crossing the Chasm, Marketing and Selling High-Tech Products to Mainstream Customers by Jeffrey Moore. And this book was published in 2006. And you said that while it seems this book is about how to sell a technology product to different personas, it's far deeper than that. How deep is it?
It's very deep. It goes to the core of understanding why you're in business and who you're selling to. So what Geoffrey Moore did was he created this curve, and he said, when you come out with a new idea, there's a group called the innovators and early adopters, which they're just interested in new things all the time, because that's just, they like new stuff. But most of us fall into what they would call the bell shape, the big bell part of the curve. And that's about 60% of any market. And those people want to know, well, why should I buy something different? Why is your product better than something else? Why should I change anything? I'm happy with what I have. And so the ability, so what he said was those innovators and early adopters, that small piece, there's a gap between taking your product and appealing to those guys and appealing to the mass market. And so what happens to a lot of companies, because there's hundreds of thousands of products and services that get launched every year, and they get some traction from these early innovators and early adopters, but they don't make it. So why do they fail? Because they haven't really listened to the voice of that part of the customer that is not those innovators and early adopters that just like new stuff because they like new stuff. They haven't really figured out who that marketplace is and why that particular customer or persona or group of customers would be interested in what they have. And so what's fascinating to me is a company can go to market, not really understand who their product is good for, because they're just like, I have a product, want to buy it, right? And they just think everybody's our customer, and they're not. Just like the diaper bag example, right?
Yeah.
So going out and creating a product and thinking that our product is great for everybody, when in fact, if you really, what I think is great about social is looking at the voice of the customer. So I was asked when I was in PR to do a campaign about cake mix. And so they said, come up with an innovative cake mix campaign. So you're thinking cake mix. Okay, it comes in a box. It has flavors. You can make it really simple where you just add egg and a cup of oil and water and it bakes, right? So what are you going to say? How are you going to appeal to customers? So I went online, we did social listening, and we found that there were 5 times when people mentioned cake mixes: in anticipation of an event, birthday, wedding, anniversary, shopping for the event, actually baking the cake at the event, and reminiscing about the event. And because we actually listened to how customers use the product and what was important to them, we could then stand up a 5-pillar campaign with content and information that was important to them. So in anticipation, right? Shopping for recipes, like all the things that, like really understanding your customer and understanding what they want and need, and then providing that kind of content created such a brand advocacy because we understood their psyche, we understood what was important to them, and then we delivered that. So was there a lot of difference between one box of cake mix and another box of cake mix? Not really.
No.
What was different was the experience we provided.
Yeah. Meet your customer where they're at.
Right. And understand them and care about what they care about.
Yes,
right. And
absolutely.
Don't think that whatever you're doing or saying applies to everybody, but get to know who that is. And that's really, so Jeffrey Moore, he talked about that for tech products, but that goes for anything, from a phone to cake mixes to diaper bags to anything, right? Really understanding who that customer is and tailoring that message and that product to meet their needs. And then always innovating, because customers need and want new things. And if you're not really paying attention to what that is, there's no way that you could possibly know, right? So that voice of the customer, I mean, there's a theme here, right? And it's really listening, understanding, acting, and then learning.
Yeah, which is, again, it's every interaction, regardless of what that interaction is, whether it's a relationship, man, woman, couples, whatever it may be, parent, children, friends, lovers. It's so important to listen and understand. Yeah. So book number 5, Bold: How to Go Big, Create Wealth and Impact the World, by Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler. And you say that this is a book about the art of the possible.
Yes. So what's interesting about what Peter and Stephen did was there's this idea that there's not enough, right? And so what's fascinating is now with exponential technology, and what that term means is technology that accelerates things so fast and makes so much abundance that we didn't have before. So before we're kind of like slow and incremental, where the technologies, whether it's medicine or customer service or um, lots of different fields, the technology has advanced at such an exponential rate. The ability to take data and augment it with AI in the cloud, the ability to do and serve people and meet customers where they are, as well as employees. The world has transformed, and it's transformed exponentially. But most people don't know that underneath everything we do is technology. So you go all the way back to the beginning of time, and our technology was fire or a wheel or flint, right? So what's fascinating is that when you go all the way through time, you start to see that there are tools, which we now call technology, that have changed the way that we work and live and play. And so the first industrial revolution, like we actually mark our point in time, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the first industrial revolution. We name our timeline of existence based on the tools that we have. And we're now in the fifth industrial revolution, where technology and human need are coming together in a way that they've never come together before. And that's what Peter and Stephen are really talking about, is this mesh of looking at people and their needs and wants and being in service to those versus the almighty dollar of stakeholders.
Do you think artificial intelligence is going to be a good thing, or more of a dehumanizing thing?
I think it comes down to human beings. It comes down to the technology and how we deploy it, how we envision it helping our world and our life. So artificial intelligence, it's a program, right? It's software. It in itself can't do anything. It requires human interaction to do it. So it's really based on the human beings that are programming it. Yeah. Now, Hollywood would have you believe that it could program itself. I can tell you from working in the technology world that we can barely get it to answer your customer service questions the way that you want to be served. So will it ever happen? I don't think in my lifetime. If it were to advance that quickly, I don't think that's likely. It's really up to us as humans to direct how that is going to go. And so, there's the movies, The Social Dilemma. There's a number of really good documentaries on the use or misuse and abuse of technology. And when you look at it, it's not the technology itself. It's not the servers. It's not the code. It's not the chips, right? It's the person who designed the chip to be evil, to steal stuff off your laptop.
Yeah.
It's the someone who's creating campaigns to put out propaganda about on a social network about things that aren't true, right? But the social network itself didn't do that. So what is fascinating to me is kind of a Margaret Mead of technology, is to look at our own psyche and our own motivations and asking ourselves, why are we doing this? And there are many people who still want to have that power over, right? Instead of really helping people transform, they are, they want to be, they want to take control, and they want you to think a certain thing. And until we get to a point in civilization, and maybe there's always the good and the bad, right? And contrast is good because it tells you what you don't want. We have a choice. Everyone has a choice.
Yeah.
And it's up to us to, when people are making choices that we don't agree with, that aren't good for everyone, it's up to us to say, let's not do that.
And people are doing that more and more.
They are.
more and more. Yeah. Book number 6. I really love this woman. Clicking 17 Trends That Drive Your Business and Your Life by America's most highly regarded trends forecaster, Faith Popcorn. And this book was published in 1996.
She's one of my favorite authors. I think because the idea that you could take a thought and spark new thoughts in other people, to me, was a fascinating concept, right? So thinking about yourself as a thought provoker, someone who stokes new ideas to create sparks in other people. I mean, I think that's the ultimate challenge, and the ultimate source of success is to really be able to take your words and have people think differently. And so I really honor the work that she did, because I think she's one of the forerunners of being one of the true change makers in the world.
Yeah. If people think her books are just about business, they're not. They're really about psychology and understanding human nature and being able to, respond to that.
And I think that when people understand that that's what business is about,
Yes.
is human nature, whether you're talking about employees or you're talking about customers, now you've got the world by the tail.
Yeah, indeed. So book number 7, another one of my favorite authors, Social Intelligence, The New Science of Human Relationships by Daniel Goleman.
So I'm checking my notes because I love what was written about this. And it says that as social creatures, we're in a neural ballet that connects us brain to brain. And when we begin with empathy, which means sitting in the seat of the other person, we see the world through their eyes. And then, and only then, can we engage in a neural ballet that creates far more meaning and is far more rewarding. And when we were looking at the book that Tony and I wrote, and we were thinking about, what were we trying to convey? And the construct of business was all about sitting in the seat of themselves or their banker or the stakeholders, the Wall Street folks, and money, 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 that they thought that that was the path to success. And in the first industrial revolution, maybe it was, but now you flash forward and we're so advanced and we've kind of used up the capacity of that thought. And so now sitting in the seat of the customer and the employee and creating those neural networks, which is really creating the relationship, which then is what leads to the loyalty, is the way to successful business, is the way to more revenue. But it really, what I love about what Daniel said was, there's a social intelligence, right? This invisible network of connectedness. And when we connect on that level, then we've actually hit a way to communicate and interface and interact with one another that hits the heart, that hits the emotional part.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that I think businesses are missing, is they kind of like just shut out the emotional part. And it makes no sense, because we're human beings and we have feelings. And so how we feel determines how we interact and how much we bring ourselves. There's another book that I didn't get to mention, is by David White. He's a corporate poet. And, there's a quote in there where he talks about how we bring 60% of ourselves to work. The rest we leave on the bus, in the car, on the train. So as an employer, would you like 60% of me, or would you like 80%? You're paying me.
Yeah.
But if you don't hear what I'm saying and you don't care about my thoughts and you think it's just like tasks without the emotional aspect, then you're missing a great deal of what you're paying me for.
Yeah. I'm curious to know the youth of today, the young ones just entering the workplace. They're a different breed from previous generations, and many organizations have said, we've got to rethink things here because they're not quite sure how to work with these people. Now, many people in the spiritual arena look upon, the kids of today, and I'm going up to sort of the 25s, 27s, as being a different breed spiritually as well, much more connected. And they have different kinds of values, and they can also, they can smell inauthenticity. They don't need to have to learn that one. Are you finding that some of the companies that you work with are having to rethink how they deal, particularly with that age group, because they're the future?
Absolutely. So I think if we go back to Geoffrey Moore's technology, kind of like that whole, crossing the chasm. If you think about who your customer is, right? So maybe your customers were the boomers or Gen X or Gen Y. You look at this new generation, what they value and what's important to them. And every generation is a cohort into itself. And what I've seen is that every cohort, the next cohort that comes, is in reaction to what the previous cohort had done and how they conducted themselves. And so when I talk to people in their 20s, especially like I'll use my nephews, for instance, their concerns about the environment, their concerns about whether a company is sustainable, their concerns about being transparent are things that weren't part of the zeitgeist of work that are now. And I'm just realizing that my computer's not plugged in, so I'm going to plug it in before I lose power. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay. What's really fascinating to me is that I think that generation taught us a lot about that we need to think about people's feelings. And so now, not only do you now see that generation saying what's so for them, but they've actually influenced all the other generations to require this transparency. And I think that's what happened in the Great Resignation, is that people in the older demographics hadn't had a moment to stop and think about what was important to them. And COVID gave us that cause for pause. And as a result, we went, this doesn't work. Why are we doing these things? And so I think that the younger generations have definitely transformed what's required of companies, and it's giving them the you see DE&I, right? Diversity, inclusion, equity, and inclusion initiatives. You see sustainability initiatives, which were never part of any corporate structure or objectives until it became like, I'm not going to come work for you unless I see that you at least try to exhibit these goals.
Yeah.
So yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. So again, we go back to, do people's feelings matter? Yes, greatly. And we can continue to be in the zeitgeist of ignoring them, or we can be on the leading edge and be the company or companies that put this at the forefront of our brand. We need to walk our talk, though. So if you're going to say you're that, then you need to walk and talk, because otherwise you'll end up with comments on Blind or other places where people are like, yeah, great PR message, but they don't walk their talk.
There's nowhere to hide these days. Nowhere to hide.
No, Glassdoor, Blind, all those sites are places where people go and say, yeah, I tried it. I wanted to believe it wasn't true.
Yeah. So book number 8 is The Tipping Point, How Little Things Can Make a Big Difference, which is pretty much what we're talking about all the time here, by Malcolm Gladwell, of course, published in 2000.
Yeah. So I think Malcolm I love the fact that he has these concepts and then he finds research to show how the concept plays out in real life. And so to me, as a researcher, it was really fascinating to see how he laid out the book and how he made the point that little things matter. And at the end of the day, it's the little things that shape our decisions and are the tipping point to what we choose for our own lives.
Mm. Yes, what do they say? It's all those little details that are the most important things, not the big necessarily.
Right. I mean, you have to have the big construct, right?
Yeah,
But at the
yeah,
end of the day, when you're choosing between A or B or C or D, what is that like? What is that little conversation that you have with yourself about, well, this has got that and this has got that? And at the end of the day, almost always it comes down to what is that experience
yes,
going to
yeah,
be? And so I was talking to someone about, because they didn't quite get the concept of experience. And I said, well, what we're selling is our experiences, right? And they're like, well, no, I'm selling a pencil. I said, no, you're selling the experience of the pencil, right? So what does it feel like in my hand? Does it stay sharp? Does the lead break? When I go to erase it, does it leave like smudgy, weird things on the paper, right?
mm.
So it's the experience of using the product. So as a product person, would you go to market and say, I'm selling you a pencil, and my pencil is the worst pencil on the planet. Would you like to buy it? What company would do that in their right mind? They wouldn't. But rarely does a company use their product to know that the lead doesn't stay sharp, that the eraser falls off,
Mm.
that when you put too much pressure on it, the thing breaks, right? And so it's not the product, it's the experience of using the product
Yeah,
is what people are buying.
yeah,
And so when you put yourself in the seat of the customer and you use your own product, do a little mystery shopping or actually just buy your product and use it, that you see, oh, we really have things to improve. Or, wow, that's really cool. And wouldn't it be better if, right? And that's where the innovation comes in, is in the use and the experience of.
yeah, yeah. The experience is really, really important. So, number 9, start with why. How great leaders inspire everyone to take action by Simon Sinek. I don't have when that one was published for some reason.
That's okay. It's a good one. I think what's interesting about leadership books is helping people understand how to be a good leader, right? And so through a lot of my life in corporations, I lived through a lot of command and control. And I would make a suggestion and I would get feedback like, well, now I've been in business longer than you've been alive. So, and we've been very successful. So why would we change anything? I was like, okay, got it. That's your perspective. Here's why. And if the construct of what I was saying didn't have a reference point, meaning there was a place in their brain that they could place it, a shelf, it would fall off. So without a reference point, a lot of times, a lot of these concepts that we're talking about here, until times have really changed and businesses or leaders have experienced a large problem, right? Not enough employees, not enough revenue, something. It's only then when they really start to change how they think. And I think what was interesting about Simon's book was a lot of people think leadership is power over people when it's really just the ability to inspire others to be their best.
Yeah, yeah. And I liked, Sinek says people are inspired by a sense of purpose or why. And this should come first when communicating before how and what. That reminds me so much of Viktor Frankl's work. And Viktor Frankl's book comes up more times than probably any other book in this book club. Over 100 shows. I would think that his comes out as the top book so far. And you wouldn't think of it as a spiritual book per se, but he's quite right. If you understand, the why, then you can always find the how.
Yeah, right.
Mm.
And I think it's that old what's in it for me,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Right. What's the WIFM? Why should I care? because then the how and the what, right, just become mechanics of that. But unless you appeal to the why, then and again, what I'm finding as a paradigm shifter and someone who's we talk a lot about in our book blind spots. And so when someone can't see what they can't see, it's really interesting to try to get them to think or feel differently. And sometimes it takes quite a bit of effort to be able to have people see things in a new way. And I think that's really the challenge is if you've come from a command and control background, right? If you were in the military, what happened in corporate America is we had a bunch of world wars. The military command and control was very necessary for mission critical operations. That's a whole other way of leading, and the reasons why they lead that way are, founded. There's probably could be also, some improvement there, but when you start to take that zeitgeist and then you now put that in the civilian world where you're not fighting against a big enemy and it's life or death, now you're actually asking people to do something and they need the why because there isn't that big threat, right? There isn't that big threat that's uniting them. So Peter in his book talks about the massive transformative purpose, which is really the why. Why are we doing this, right? And when people can connect to the why, then the what and the how become part of their motivation to get to that why.
Yeah. Book number 10, the final book, The Experience Economy, Work is Theatre and Every Business a Stage, by Joseph Pine and James Gilmore, 1999.
So Joe was an inspiration to me because he took what I thought seemed like spirituality, seemed like what a lot of these books are pointing towards, and said the world is a stage. And said that if you're going to be on that stage and have a presence and be able to attract an audience, right? So think about your business as a TV show or a movie, and you want the world to pay attention. And now you have the world as a stage. What experience are you giving them that's going to keep them enrolled? So, what if we write a TV show and it's got horrible jokes and horrible actors and a horrible set? Would anybody watch it? Probably not. But what if you choreograph your business as though you are appealing to an audience and you know that audience's wants and needs and whys? When you choreograph your products and services to deliver experiences that are enrolling, now you've really captured their attention. And I think Joe he was one of the first people who said, you're not selling a pencil. You're selling the experience of this pencil. So people thought of service as experience, right? But whether it's a physical product or a service, right, it's still an experience. And so what he basically broke down was no matter what you're selling, there's an experience of that thing. And that experience itself is what creates loyalty or disloyalty. And for me, that was a foundational point in business for me to try to help companies to see the world differently and to see that what was important and what we thought were important, like in the beginning of product development, there's always product and price. And so as you develop a product, you're like, okay, well, what are our features and functions and capabilities? And as we go to market, we're going to say, well, ours is bigger and better because, right? Versus saying, when you use our product, here's the experience you will have. Yeah. So I remember in the very beginning when digital cameras came out and they would say, well, it's 1 megapixel. And I read that and I thought, how many pixels does a girl need? I don't know. I don't really, right? 1, 10, a half. What I wanted to know was if I take a picture and I blow it up, will it be blurry? Right? Or if I take a picture and I send it to somebody, is it going to clog their email and they're going to hate me because their email is spinning, right? So what I wanted to know is, what is the experience of using the pictures from the camera? But when you're in the idea that you're selling a product, not the experience of the product, you don't realize that that's really what you're selling, and you market it as features and functions and capabilities. And if it's technical or it has a certain language or jargon to it, I may or may not know what that means, versus a company that translates what that means. What's the whiff and what's why? What's the why? What's in it for me? And, again, like all these, it's so fascinating how these all kind of mix together and kind of land in the same place. And it comes back down to, where we started, Sandy. Something very, very simple is people and feelings.
Yes.
And why that matters.
Yeah. And so many, we know that women, spend more money, they do the purchasing. And often it's and it's an emotional experience. If you can touch their emotions, but if you don't, equally, you're out of business.
You're out of business. That's right.
Yeah. Well, that's your 10 best books. Now, tell me about the inspiration behind Empathy in Action, your book.
So, obviously, having like all this influence, right? All these people, and I work in the world of customer experience. So, my work has been, whether I was a management consultant or an analyst or head of a digital division of an agency or being in software, it's always been about what experiences do we provide for people, right? And mixing that with, like right now, we're using technology, right? I'm on my laptop, right? I've logged in using the internet. I'm using, a streaming service with you. And if we didn't have technology, we couldn't be doing this. So even the simplest of things, telephone calls, texts, being able to communicate like this, require technology. And you've chosen this service because it works, right? What if the connection was spotty, or we couldn't really see each other, or the audio didn't work? You would say, well, the experience of it is bad. So what I do is I help companies look at the experience, right? And then use technology to deliver a better experience, both for the customer and for the employee. And so we were going down this path of launching a new way to think about experiences. And Tony, my co-author, the CEO, said, this seems like common sense, Nat. If experiences are so important, why don't companies just do this, right? We should be able to tell everybody this. This doesn't make any sense that this isn't happening. And I said, well, there's a bunch of paradigms and paradigm shifts that we have to help our customers see. And the first one is that up until now, and I include myself in this, up until now, up until the fifth industrial revolution, technology could not deliver on the promises we were asking to keep. And that's the truth. So we might have tried to deliver good customer experiences, but the truth is, only with the recent advances in AI and digital in the cloud can we actually do many of the things that we can do. So, the ability to be able to do your own podcast. I mean, this used to require being in a studio with a broadcast camera, right? And it's only now that these things have advanced to the point where we can do our own broadcasting, which is like fantastic, right? It gives us a lot of freedom, and it's a lot less expensive than having to rent studio time or be asked to be part of a studio. So in this fifth industrial revolution, and that's part of what Peter talks about in his book Bold, is that there's so much abundance and so much goodness that technology has brought us if we use it the right way. And in my field, you can use that technology in new ways to orchestrate experiences that we've never been able to do before. But if you have the mindset that providing those experiences is a cost, and you want to reduce the cost, then you're going to think that changing and doing it a different way is going to cost you more. But what we've done is we've said, so let's look at that human element. If I could show you that providing a better experience, which is what you're selling, no matter what you're selling, drives loyalty and drives trust and customer lifetime value, by doing it differently, by using these new technologies, you're actually delivering a better experience, which means that your customers will be loyal. And what if the employee didn't experience so much cognitive burden? So we had someone help us get set up, right? That person is behind the scenes, and I want to say thank you to them, right? And what if that experience for that person getting us set up was horrible, right? They would probably say, don't use this technology either. So employees face a great deal of cognitive burden because they come to work and they don't, say, you know what, I'm going to do a terrible job today. I'm really not going to try to do any of my work. I mean, there's probably some people who do that, but most of us come to work and we really want to do a good job. But the tools that we give people, if we really haven't empowered them with the tools that are going to allow them to do their best, then they can't. So putting on a different hat and really looking at businesses from creating trust and loyalty with your employees and customers and employing technologies that we've never had before now sets up a new zeitgeist in business. And that's really what the book Empathy in Action is about. And I would say the first step, though, having said all that, is putting yourself in the seat of the customer and the employee and seeing the experience from their point of view. Because when you do, when you call your own 800 number, when you chat with a chat bot on the website and you realize how awful it is, you'd be like, why are we doing it this way?
Yeah. It's so interesting. I mean, I was very much involved in direct marketing many years ago, and I was ahead of the time because I didn't come from a marketing background. I came from a magazine background, and I was very used to knowing what my readers wanted. And so I took that with me, and I had a different perspective, and it proved to be quite, very successful for the agency's clients. There was an old saying about, do you really know what business you're in? And as you've pointed out with the pencil, for example, they think they're in the business of selling pencils. No, they're in the business of, selling the experience that goes along with that. How would you apply that to yourself? What business are you in?
That's a very good question. I'm in the business of getting people to think differently.
Yeah.
That's really it, right? And my job is actually pretty fun because whether it's working internally inside our company or whether it's talking to customers, it's really giving people the why to think different.
Yes.
And helping them see things that they can't see. And what I found was, because for a while I thought, well, maybe leaders just don't care, or maybe they're just, they're really all about the almighty dollar. And some are, and some come from the old financial paradigm that if I spend money to do this differently, it's going to cost me more. And in reality, it's going to cost you less and reap those revenue benefits. But that can be difficult to see if you don't have this new mindset. But my job is to talk to people and to help them sit in the seat of their customers, to see the experience through those customers' eyes, and then ask them, don't you think it would behoove you and your company to change that? And what if I could help you do that without it being really, really difficult? And what's fascinating is I just met with a large automotive company the other day, and I started out by saying, we're really honored to have this opportunity to talk to you and about the possibility of being your trusted advisor. And what I was selling was not software. I was selling the experience of dealing with our company.
Yeah.
At the end, I said, we had a slide up on PowerPoint and it said something about like a next meeting, some sort of assessment or something. I said, well, this slide is really a fancy way of saying that we really appreciate your time and we'd like to have another conversation. And so I'd like to close now by asking you, was this time spent with us valuable? And what was good and what would be better if? Because that helps us learn and grow. And there was silence both on my side of the team that I came with and the customer. And they said, well, we have to tell you, Nat, this has been a really unusual call. Unlike any vendor call we've ever had, nobody's ever asked us if it was a good call. And just the way that you're being tells us that you're not trying to sell us a pencil, that you have our back, that you care about our results, you care about our outcomes, and you're going to be there for us.
Mm.
And so when I can do that, I get double goosebumps because I know I've connected on a human element. I know I've connected to people and their hearts and their souls. And I'm speaking to them authentically from my heart to say, I truly want this to be better. And I know we can do it together.
And that's when selling becomes a spiritual practice.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I read a book some years ago. I think it was about conscious commerce. And in it, the author wrote that back in the day, probably, I don't know, pre-biblical times, whatever, selling was considered every bit as sacred as anything, you know, as religion, etc. And what used to happen in the marketplace is that they would have acolytes, spiritual trainees, who would sit in the marketplace and they would chant and they would meditate, and their sole purpose was to keep the energy flowing on a very nice, even keel for everybody, you know, so that nobody's getting angry, nobody's losing their, you know, their rag, etc. Nobody's intent on cheating anybody. It is truly a spiritual, you know, exchange, if you like. And that's the way that I've always looked at marketing, is that it has to be, at its root, it has to be a spiritual practice. And I really love the title of your book, and I love what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. And I hope people, you know, this isn't our normal No BS Spiritual Book Club kind of interview, because we have talked a lot about business, but as we've said, you know, it's no different from anything else in life. How we communicate with one another, where we're coming from in that communication is just critical for everything.
And I hope that this particular podcast gives other people permission, right? Because sometimes we bring ourselves to work and then we shut off that spiritual part, right?
Yeah.
Or in our personal lives, we have the spiritual part, but we don't bring that business part. And so, you know, part of also, I guess, what I'm selling is coming together as whole humans,
Yes.
right? And bringing that whole self to whatever it is that we're doing. And so if that gives somebody else permission to be that touchy-feely person who ends their emails with a heart, right? Mission accomplished. It's been a good day.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So final question, Natalie, what are you reading now?
So I am now reading that book that you mentioned by the Purpose. I'm blanking on.
Oh, Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, Viktor Frankl is
wow.
book. Yeah, I had read it years ago, and someone just gave me a copy, and so I'm rereading it. And what's interesting is because Natalie has evolved, right? And all these books have influenced my journey, and I've spent the last 3 years developing this narrative and figuring out how do I communicate this to people who can't hear what I can't hear, who have blind spots, who have no reference point, to now read his book and understand more about the why. It's opened me up in new ways that I didn't even know was possible. So what's fascinating is books, to me, are kind of this opportunity to just continue. Like you read a book, right? But go back and read it again because you've changed and your perspective has changed and you have evolved. And when you go back and you read a book, there are things that I see in that book that I swear were not in the book, or I just somehow, there was no reference point for me, so I didn't see them. And now that my eyes are opened in a different way, I see things that I couldn't see before.
Mm.
And so it's really, it's kind of fun to reread a book.
Yeah. Yeah. And Viktor Frankl's, wow, you know, it came up so many times on people's lists that I thought I really have to read this book. So I'm ashamed to say that it's a recent read for me, but boy, was it impactful on every level, you know, on every level.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, Dr. Natalie Petouhoff, thank you so much for adding your 10 best spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's archive of recommendations.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun. I've learned
It
a
has
lot
been
about
fun.
myself just talking about this out loud. So thank you. You're a great
Oh,
host.
you're so welcome. Thank you. So you can learn more about Dr. Natalie Petouhoff's book at empathyinactionbook.com. And now, before we close, a few words about the No BS Spiritual Book Club. As we all know, the spiritual book market is becoming increasingly crowded, and it's becoming ever more challenging to sort the wheat from the chaff. We just don't have the time to read them all, which is why we launched the No BS Spiritual Book Club, so that we could provide you with trusted recommendations from authors, teachers, speakers, and others who've walked this path before you. So check out our free 10 best spiritual books archive at the nobsspiritualbookclub.com, where you can also view previous episodes of this interview series. And you can add your name to our Save My Space list to get last minute reminders of upcoming episodes. And finally, if you feel you have a book in you but don't know how to begin getting it out of your head and into the hands of those who are waiting to read it, while you're at the website, click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you're looking for. That's it for this week. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and I will be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview. Till then, it's goodbye from me and goodbye to Natalie Petouhoff. Thank you.
Thank you.